So I'm going to go through a workshop. It's going to be a bit more of a live coding session rather than theory, essentially. So first of all, I just want to give a very, very, very short HaxeUI primer, because I think maybe a lot of people haven't used HaxeUI. So I just want to sort of write a very simple application, nothing particularly clever, just to sort of show you how they fit together. Then maybe a little bit more useful is there's an existing HaxeUI application that I have, which is essentially a map maker, if you like, or a map thing, and we're going to add a login system to that, hopefully using the builder. Then these don't really have code associated with them, but some notable recent enhancements that have got into the master branches and the validation branch, and some upcoming enhancements that will come soon, basically. Then there's a demo application that I want to show. Well, it's not a demo application. It's a AS3 and Flex application that's been converted to Haxe and HaxeUI. So I'm going to show you that as well. Of course, I don't have source code for that because it's not my application, it's closed source. But that's basically what we'll be going through, and hopefully that will fill 2 hours. Disclaimer, I'm not a Mac user, so it's going to be like pulling teeth watching me trying to use this. But yeah, hopefully we'll get there eventually. Maybe that'll take the 2 hours. So the first one, this is just a really basic HaxeUI primer. So what we're going to do is just create a basic project structure, get a basic build working, which we'll use HaxeUI HTML5, which is one of the backends. I use that one by default generally because it's fastest, it's really, really fast to compile, and it's just very easy to test. Then we'll add some components via code, which is, I guess, maybe what some people like doing, not me personally. Then we'll enhance that by moving it to UI, moving it to XML, do some styling, create a really junk sort of custom component just to show what's possible. And then where it gets interesting is we'll then use exactly the same code on HaxeUI OpenFL and compile it to HTML5 OpenFL, and then maybe if we can handle the compilation times, Mac OS. And then the really interesting part is we'll do the exact same application, totally 100% native with no code changes whatsoever. So I'm going to flip away from that and actually just get into some code, if I can. Like I say, it's going to be painful to watch me use a Mac, I'm afraid. So the first thing we'll do is create a new folder. So I need to close this maybe, or yeah, probably. Yeah, okay. Well, the first part was just creating a folder, so that wasn't too crazy. So we'll create a source directory. Standard sort of Haxe stuff, basically. See, this is something that I don't like. Like how do you create new files? Yeah. I mean, eventually we'll open this up in VS Code, of course. And I spelled that wrong. Okay, so we've got a main class. Can you see any of this, by the way? Is it really small? So, yeah. Like I say, could be a bit longer than I expected. I can't see anything personally. Okay. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit because I feel like this is going to take a little bit too long. So I'm just going to pull in from the HaxeUI deploy stuff, basically, an HXML file, which will just make things a little bit easier. I think Haxe UI 2, and these are all available. So this is the template, so you can just copy and paste them. I'll show you it anyway because it's not complicated. HTML5. Now, probably what I should have done first is actually let's just open it here, right? Okay, so that's a bit simpler. Right. And can you see that? Or is it really small? It's tiny. You see that? Sort of. So the actual HXML file is really straightforward. All we're doing is class path of the source, main.hx is our main, Haxe UI core and Haxe UI HTML5 and the HScript library. So it's all straightforward, nothing particularly clever, and we'll output the JS file. Now this isn't using Haxe UI. I mean, it's included, but it's not actually using Haxe UI yet. So if we wanted to, which we do, use Haxe UI, the first thing we want to do is essentially import the toolkit, obviously, and we want to initialize it. Okay, so now we're actually using Haxe UI. It's not going to do anything particularly interesting. Another thing that we'll need is, which doesn't come as part of it, is, whoops, in the build, now we've got our JS file, which is fine. But there's no index, there's not an HTML file, and there's a little bit of CSS that needs, which eventually will be generated by the back end, but at the moment it isn't. So again, a little bit of a cheat. We'll go into the build, which is part of the templates. So again, this is all available. Grab the, and just paste it in. It will need a change, I imagine, because it's going to be using a different .js file. So we just want to change that to test. Oh, okay, so yeah, so that worked. Okay, so that's fine. So now we've got our completely useless app that should initialize the toolkit. There shouldn't be, I don't know how you open developer tools here, but it doesn't do anything interesting anyway at the moment. So what we want to do now is, again, later we're going to be using it in a more cross-platform way. So we're going to use the Haxe UI app, which is, again, I think if last year I was talking about it. It's my way of doing it. I'll have to import it as well, though. I don't know if there's a shortcut for this. There probably is, but I don't know. Yeah. So what we just want to do is create one. And finally, we want to initialize that, which should give us a ready, which takes a callback. Yep. And that's basically done. I mean, we also need to do apps.start at some point. So again, doesn't do anything particularly special, but now we've got essentially a Haxe UI. A Haxe UI application working. Eventually. And R, yeah. Okay, so we'll start by adding components in code. I don't think, it's not my favorite way of doing it, but it seems like some people do like it. So very simple, very straightforward. Again, have to import the stuff. I'm just going to import all of them because it will make it easier. Components. And we'll just import all of them if I can find the star. And the same for containers. Okay, cool. So, very straightforward. We'll create a VBox, which is a vertical box, obviously. I didn't. and we'll create some buttons. And add them to the VBox, which by add component. Yep. Again, it's a little bit like pulling teeth, I know. And finally, we've got our VBox now, and it's all populated or whatever. And we just app.addComponent VBox. Okay. So that's our application. It's tiny, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure why it's that small. But we could change that with styles if we wanted to. I think when I stuck this in, it did something. But anyway, it's definitely there. So this is our, again, it's a completely useless application, but it's very, very quick to get that sort of thing running. Again, some people like doing it this way. Not my personal way of doing it. I mean, this is I find it laborious, especially with when the application really starts to grow. I prefer personally XML. So we'll go down that route. Pretty straightforward. Create a new folder. Let's call it assets if we want. And we'll cool. And we'll create, let's say, a main in there. Again, these can be anything you want. So we'll do exactly the same thing in there. Inbox. And of course, now we need to load that. So the way it loads is a bit differently. So I'm just going to dump all of this now because that's essentially useless now. Okay. So this works a bit differently. We'll import another class, UI.macros.component macros. And if I can remember, we var main. I think it's build component. And then we just give it the string, which is what assets main.xml. Okay. And then again, of course, also we have to add that to our app, basically. Again, you don't have to use app. I'm just using it because later we're going to use Ajax widgets and OpenFL, which means that it will take care of the entire lifecycle for you, which is nice. So that should essentially be no different whatsoever, which is right. So that's fine. And just a little bit of how things get easier is now, you could go, for example, list view. Let's say width equals 200. Okay, now we've got a list view. It doesn't have any data, of course. We can give it some data. You don't have to put the data in like statically. You can you could do it dynamically, of course. But for the point of this, icon as well. See if I can remember where there is one. Haxe UI, core, styles, default, Haxe UI, I believe. I will soon find out. So, great. Okay, I know what's there. So now you've got a list view. It's got, it comes with all the bells and whistles if you like it. It's a working list view. I mean, this is a HTML5, so this is a composite. It outputs a DOM tree essentially. Nothing particularly special, but yeah, it's a DOM tree. And you can do the same for. I'm trying to think of some other components, but they're all essentially there. There's nothing. The component set is pretty nice. So now you can do styling as well. There's a couple of ways that you can do styling. You could, for example, let's say you wanted to go style. And just make all the buttons green foreface, basically. So probably going to be very hard to see on the screen, to be fair. But yeah, so, I mean, you can't, I don't know if you can just see it, but no, you can't at all. But trust me, they're green. You can also inline style as well, of course. So you could go style, if you learn how to spell. And again, okay, you can see it this time. And the same sort of thing with font size and all this kind of stuff. Everything that's valid there is valid everywhere else. Equal 932. Okay, so it's a really basic application. It doesn't do anything particularly clever. It's a list with some buttons. I just want to show you also custom components, because these are actually quite nice. These are quite useful, as hopefully you'll see. So we'll create another file. Let's call it, that was a folder, wasn't it? Nope. Called custom.xml. And let's just start it off with, I don't know, let's say vbox. And we'll have a colored box in there just for fun. Okay, so this is our markup basically. Again, as you'd expect, it's just going to be a red box, basically. So it's a little bit more in depth, but it's worth it, basically. We'll create a directory called, let's say, custom. It could be anything, it's just for a package. And we'll create a class in there. Again, could be anything, but we'll call it custom. So, and And what we want to do with this is essentially going to be a component. So we're going to extend from component, and of course import that. Okay. Okay. Now I already know this is going to complain about the constructor. And we of course want to super that. Now this isn't actually being compiled at the moment. This is, you know, the DC would have pulled it out, so it's not actually working. But what we want to do, also quickly, is we want to app build this. So we want to take that XML that we've got, and we want to turn that into a custom component, which is essentially going to be represented by this class. So we'll macro build it, and it's HaxeUI.macros. Yeah, component macros build. And just assets. What was it? Custom, wasn't it? Custom.xml. So again, this still isn't going to be built because DC would have still pulled it out. So the other part, and again, it seems long-winded, but once it's done, it's done. Somewhere in the class path, you create a module. So we'll turn this application into a module, and essentially the module will end up defining some of our custom components, or all of them essentially. So we'll call it module because that's the name. And is that in the class path? It is. So straightforward. The modules can do a lot of stuff, but we're only using them in one single way. So module, and I think it's components, I believe. And then it's class package equals custom. So this will be discovered, like auto-discovered, since it's on the class path. Information will be brought in from it, and then it will start trying to build these custom components. Oh yeah, nice one. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Oh yeah, if that would have stayed like that, it would just ignored it. So then we wouldn't have been able to use it. So, okay, so now we know we're bringing it in, I think. No, we're not. That's not true. Every time. So, yeah, and the module. No autocomplete, eh? Okay, so this is coming in from probably somewhere in here then now. No, it's still here. I can't see what's wrong there personally. Probably, okay, so we're probably this something wrong here now then. Yep, so now we're definitely bringing in our XML because it broke it. But yeah, so that should fix that. Okay, so we've got our custom component now. Now you could also use this in code now if you wanted to. You could add it just like we did with a VBox, like a button, like we did anything else in the beginning when I showed you with the buttons. I don't like doing it like that way, as I said. But this is automatically registered now. So now this is automatically part of your component registry, your custom component registry. So you could just go, you know, custom. And it should say, yeah, fine. Cool. And now if you go back, we've got our custom component. And you could also, of course, you know, create a couple of them, or as many as you want. Let's say put them in an HBox this time. Okay, so now we should have 3 of them and nothing particularly special, right? But they can actually have functionality as well. So now we can start modifying our custom.xml a little bit. So let's say we wanted to do something, I don't know, like, yeah. Let's create an HBox with some buttons. So let's say say blue, and again, and button. So first of all, we can just check that's working, make sure, which it yeah, it should be. And now, you know, our custom component is a little bit more interesting. Again, you probably really can't see that much, but it's fine. Okay, so now we want to actually add functionality to that. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing this. We can, let's give this one an ID, and we'll use it in hex code. So we'll call this like make green, make blue. Let's give the box an ID as well. Equals the box. And again, this should all compile, nothing particularly special happening there. Now we can go into our custom, and again, this is done with a macro, so this is all very nice. Now we've got a make blue button. Here's a function. And it takes an event, but we don't really care about it. And we can just go the box dot background color equals OXF. And we can make sure that works. So we've only linked up the first one, but they're all, of course, isolated from each other. But then again, of course, they're isolated from each other because they're part of the Haxe class. What's quite cool is you could also do exactly the same in a much simpler way, assuming you're trying to do something pretty straightforward. I've lost where I am. Yep. And you can just go here, for example, on equals, you know, the box. And then that should work as well. Yeah. So it's a completely chuck away application. There's nothing particularly interesting about it, nothing particularly useful about it, certainly. But when it gets quite interesting now is, let's say, so that's all HTML5. This is has no framework dependency. It's essentially a DOM tree. So what this outputs is essentially a web page built using you know, JS dot stuff in Haxe, and so it works fine. But now let's say you wanted to use OpenFL, for example. Again, I'm going to cheat a little bit because it's just going to be quicker. I'm going to steal an application .xml from the templates. If I can see it. Can't see shit, to be honest. Okay, there it is. So I'm just going to steal that. Again, it's very, very, very straightforward sort of build, OpenFL build stuff. I'll show you in a minute. So nothing particularly special happening there. Just includes all the right stuff. This stuff actually will break, so because we don't have any of that, so we don't need any of that. And yeah, and then on the command line, it's just a matter of I'll use the and it's OpenFL HTML5. It'll take a few seconds to build because it's got to run some macros and stuff, and I think OpenFL runs some macros too. So it's the same application. It seems like the same application, but this isn't the HTML5 backend now. This is the OpenFL backend. So this is 100% an OpenFL application using sprites and all that kind of stuff. Should work exactly the same. It functions exactly the same as it does. No code changes, nothing there. And they look almost identical, but they're completely different frameworks in the back end. So not as impressive, but it's exactly the same thing. What is really cool is if we take the same thing, again, I'm just going to steal another build file, which is HaxeWidgets. This is going to take a little bit of time, unfortunately. There's no easy way about it. But I'm just going to paste this in there and make sure that it looks about right. So this is using HaxeWidgets, the HaxeWidgets backend as well, and some things just to make it static. But I should, and again, this unfortunately is going to take a little bit of time because this is done by a C++. So this is using the HaxeWidgets library, which is externs for the WXWidgets library, and then using HaxeCPP with the Haxe UI HaxeWidgets backend to have exactly the same functionality. Again, nothing's changing here except for the build file. I mean, the actual, custom is exactly the same. The module hasn't changed. Nothing has changed at all. But unfortunately, it's going to have to build the whole thing. And we can also, while it's waiting, just to really make it take longer, is Control C. You can also go OpenFL test macOS. So this will also, I'll do it in a minute because I think it would make it take even longer. So I mean, it's a really straightforward application, and actually the build process itself isn't a real pain. And what you end up with here is a totally 100% native application, which is pretty nice. One thing that you'll notice instantly is the green buttons, for example, they've gone because macOS won't let you change button colors. The button size as well, the one that was the big button, that will also won't exist on macOS because it won't let you change button sizes. I think I found a hack for it, but I don't like it. But if you run the same thing on Windows or Linux, Ubuntu or anything like that, the button sizes change because WX widgets there will allow you to change button sizes and colors and that sort of stuff. But macOS is like, nope, not having it. So there's not much you can do there. I think there's a way of hacking it, but I don't like it. So yeah, unfortunately, this is going to take a little bit longer. But I mean, we can also have, yeah.
I have a weird use case for a UI system. I intend to construct an interesting UI for a game, mostly from particle emitters.
Okay.
But I want to control where those particle emitters are placed, laid out, etc. Say it's an HTML5 game. Am I forced to use the existing backend for HTML5, or can I construct an arbitrary backend?
You can create your own backend, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the HTML. I mean, it's a bit hard because it's tough to show you here because the Hex dependencies it's a little bit weird. They don't seem to find the right ones. But I can show you as files essentially. But
theoretically, I could use.
You can write anything. Yeah.
CSS to do whatever.
Basically, all that gets passed to the backend. So it calculates the styles, it calculates the size that it thinks it's need, or if it's an auto size thing, it interrogates the backend like what is an auto size, and then it passes that information back to the backend and says, kind of draw me a box essentially, or draw me red stuff in this style, and then it's up to the backend to honor that. If it doesn't honor it, it doesn't. But if it does, then obviously it works better in general. Like rounded borders, I think, is another one I mentioned last year. The rounded borders on car I haven't implemented yet, so all the buttons will be square, because it just ignores the rounded borders. But it should honor everything else in the car backend.
Are you using the compile text there for the?
Yeah, I'm not. But also, this is the first time that it's been run as well, so it's always going to be. I mean, after this, if I change anything, it will just change the single file that needs to be changed. But yeah, it's the same. It's exactly the same with OpenFL. If I compile it via CPP, I mean, the first compile is always going to be a bit of a pain. But it's hard to sort of, create an application in front of you guys and then magically have it already working. I mean, another thing while we're waiting, again, you can just flip back if you get bored. Is you could create a Dropbox maybe. So we'll go into our main. I think it's called drop down maybe. And I'm really just doing this just to waste time, to be honest. A bit too fast maybe. Oh, okay, data. So now we should have a Dropbox basically. Not on the OpenFL because we haven't rebuilt it, but yeah. So again, you can't really see it, but it's there and it's the wrong size. But
I have a question.
Sure.
Does HaxeUI support the skin components with images?
yeah, you can. You can use there's 3 properties, I think. I can't remember what they are. They're, well, I'll show you. There's the component explorer I can show you, because that actually will show me the XML as well. So if I go to, say, maybe I don't have the component explorer here. Oh, yeah. So this is component explorer, except it doesn't have any JS. Not sure if this is going to work. No.
More interesting question is, can I use classes to?
I don't think you can yet. There's no support. I mean, I was going to show you the properties, but what I've got is you can give it an image, any image, and then you can cut chunks out of that image, and then you can line slice it. So it's kind of like an atlas, but it's not in the format, like a JSON format or something. You still have to use CSS to do it. You just have to somehow convert your atlas, if you like, into the CSS properties that it's expecting. I'd like to show you, but unfortunately I've broken it now. So, but it's definitely possible. Yeah, you can definitely. I don't know why that didn't work, to be honest. Okay, so anyway, quickly, this is now built. So this will be here. And now we've got our HX widgets build, and so it's the same application. We haven't changed anything. This is now native. It doesn't look so great because you know, you can't really see anything. But if you look at this, I mean, I'd have to add a. Let me get it to scroll quickly. Okay, so now it will be much faster to build as well, because it's only changing a single file. Okay, so, yeah, didn't work. Not sure why this isn't working. Oh, because I've added it to the, okay, fair enough. My mistake. I added to the wrong ones. Right, so this time. So this is a native list view. This is exactly as WX widgets creates a list view. The same goes for the dropdowns. This is, you know, this is a completely native OS X dropdown. As I was mentioning, the buttons are weird because it won't let you size them, and you'll also notice that none of them are green because, again, it won't let you. But if you compile this exact same thing on the Windows or undo Ubuntu, then actually it does look exactly more like what it looks like on the HTML5 backends. Difference being that it's still 100% native. And again, exactly the same, the scripting and all that sort of stuff. This all works. It's exactly the same application. Nothing changes. That's pretty cool. I'll try and see if I can get you the component explorer working quickly, because it's quite useful. Just let's see. Don't want HX widgets. So yeah, so again, I need to go in, copy a template file. Should be, bear with me, unfortunately. It's not right. Mm. Oh, sorry.
Just to confirm, this XML file and before that the hard-coded UI elements were added to be before start was called.
Yes. Yeah.
Can they be added after?
No, well, no. Then you can add dynamically if that's what you mean. Absolutely, yeah, 100%. The only difference is that start. I don't know if you're familiar with WX widgets, but once you start up the event loop, you're kind of done. You can't add anything after that because that will then basically it's a blocking function essentially posting events to the UI. You're quite happy to create a button, let's say, and then create a button based on the click of that button. But if you create anything after the event loop, after this start, essentially nothing will get called after that until you close your application because that's a blocking function. Even in WS widgets, it's the same thing. The start on HTML5 isn't actually needed. You don't actually need that start. It's really just there for car, which has a render loop, and WX widgets basically. I forgot what I was doing now. Oh yeah. Okay, so that's fine. We should be able to now, just to answer the question about I'm not sure if this is going to work. Okay, so it's using the wrong JS file. Okay, so this is the component explorer. So here, for example, this this button here is 100% a bitmap button. It's made out of all the states of it comes from one image. It gets cut out and then it gets put back together with a 9 slice. And the CSS for it doesn't work, of course. Yeah, so I can't show you the CSS. Okay, so I don't know what's happening there, but I can show you it here anyway. No, oh yeah, here you go. Yeah, buttons.css. Yeah, no, but this is an external CSS file that's loaded. So this is the style. If we look at the application again. Yeah, but this isn't 100% CSS. This is a modified version of CSS. So it's certainly not a background image and all that kind of stuff because you also need 9 slicing. So the 9 slicing works here, for example. So we've got a button.png, which is essentially all 3 states. And then you're saying clip it at a specific point, which essentially cuts out the section of it. And then we're 9 slicing that to give it the rounded stuff. So it essentially works out as an atlas, essentially. But it's not in a JSON format or anything. It's in CSS format. But it works out, and then you do that for each one of the states. So you've got your offset here. The slicing is exactly the same, but the offset, the image clip is slightly different. It moves it across one button of it, essentially. And then you end up with that. Which works. And it should be cached as well. I can't remember how well it's cached, but it should be cached. But this is something that will go on the website eventually. And then, once you can actually see the CSS, it would be a bit more useful, of course. So yeah, I forgot what I was doing. So that's yeah. So I think that's it for the really small little rubbish application, just to sort of show you how it sort of fits together. And there's a very small amount of code to do, a fair amount, especially getting even a native drop-down is relatively complicated to do manually. So yeah, so where are we here? So yeah, so that's basically all of this, really. Now, this is the next part, basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an existing HaxeUI application, which is a sort of a map thing, a sort of I call it world in conflict, where you can add conflicts onto a map and that sort of thing. I'll walk you through the application first because it's not massively complicated, but just to show you what it can do. But at the moment, you can add a marker, basically, add a conflict, if you like, or an event, regardless. There's no login system or anything like that, so you can automatically interact with it, and it makes for a pretty bad experience. You don't want everyone to be able to do that. So what we'll do is we'll add a login system to it, and get that working via HaxeUI. So first of all, let me just show you through the application, if I can remember where I put it. Oh yeah, I need to start the server as well. Okay, so now the server's running. And let's just go back to VS Code. Okay. So this is only HTML5 as well. This is not something that I could compile to native for you because it uses the Google Maps API, which means that you have to be online, obviously, or it has to be HTML5. So first of all, I'll just show you the application as it stands. So this is the application as it is. It doesn't do a huge amount yet, but it does work. So essentially what it is you can add events to there, give them casualties and all this sort of stuff, and then you can query those things and look for, I don't know, patterns if you like, or if you're interested in that kind of stuff. So this all works, and I'll show you, get some results. So now we've got some results. So this is the different sort of ones that I've added previously. It actually found out it's actually really difficult to add these sort of things because the actual casualties that you can get for any given conflict are really not simple, which I was hoping they would be, and they're not. So this is the existing application, and it works. Like I said, what the problem is, you've got this add event here, basically. Now you don't necessarily want everyone to be adding events. You want them to be able to log in, so you can, I don't know, maybe want an audit trail or something like that. But at the moment, you don't get any of that. Now you can just add an event, and oh, there's a bug there. You can just add an event, and it doesn't require you to log in. So that's the main issue. So we want to, again, I'll go back to the checklist quickly. So we want to understand the UI requirements, which is essentially we want to stop people from being able to add markers or being able to interact with the UI in a sort of a non-read-only way until they've logged in. So that's essentially what we need is a login system. Now, I'm going to try and use the builder for this, but it's very possible that I might break it in the process. So let's prototype the UI using the HaxeUI builder, which it's working, but it's not, it can go wrong. And again, I need to remember where that is. Yep. So all we essentially want is a login form, basically. I mean, this is essentially, I'm using the HTML5 version because the OpenFL version I broke a little bit while doing this. So yeah, I mean, what we really want, again, I can't really see anything, it's gone really small. Let's say we want, a VBox, or, well, let's start off with a grid. So we want a grid, there you go, and we want, let's say, label, input, I don't know, did that work? No, it did. And another label, and an input. Is this a grid? Oh, it's a box. Okay, let me try that again because I want to show you something. Okay, so we want a grid. We don't want a box. And we want a label, input, label, input. Let's change the columns to 2. Username. Password. Let's vertically align them to just make them look a bit nicer. Center. Give us some IDs. What we'll call this username, maybe. We don't want any text. We'll give it a placeholder. I don't know. Enter username. And we'll do the same for this one. Call it Call it password. Remove the text and. Okay, so that's our basic UI. I mean, we can tart it up a little bit as well. Let's say we want, let's say an HBox. So we'll give it an HBox. We'll stick an icon there to make it look nice. That didn't work. And let's say we want to, it's kind of hard on the Mac, to be honest. I want to drag that over to there, for example. So that's our basic UI. It's nothing particularly special about it. The source we could have just written quite easily by hand, but the idea, at least anyway, is that eventually this will become a little bit more developed and you won't necessarily need to write as much source as you do need to. But let's assume that that's what it is. So that's our, we prototyped it, right? So we'll assume that this is exactly what we want. Now this is going to be a little bit boring, I'm afraid, but let's lock down the existing UI. So basically we want to remove the ability for the user to do anything, essentially. Now, it's relatively straightforward in this application because there's only a single place where this can happen. So at the moment there's a single place. So let me try and find the source files. So we've got our main. So this is basically the main layout, essentially. Can I close that? So this is our the slider bar and all this kind of stuff, and this is our header here. So you see this add group that essentially adds up to this thing here. That's the header, and this add event is that add group. So we can just hide that. And now it should be gone. Cool, so that's gone. Notice that that looked a bit dodgy though, so we can probably sort that out a bit with some vertical alignment maybe. Oh, let's do vertically aligned. Okay, not sure why that is. Okay, that's fine. Probably. Okay, it's a bit better. Okay, so yeah, so we've essentially locked down our application now. It's not, of course, you could do it in much better ways, but essentially you can no longer add items to the map unless something else has happened. So also while we're here, actually, we might as well add another button to login. I guess that makes sense. And we should, yeah, it's an O. Right, so now the bit that's a little bit boring, I think, and I should have probably made one earlier, but you just have to bear with me while I write it, is a really, really fake kind of login system. I did have one on a previous computer, unfortunately. So let's go, what do we want to do? Let's put it in here, why not? So let's create a new class, so user manager. We don't want to be able to make it. And what do we want? We want a login function. And a callback maybe. We also probably want a logout function. I'll give it a, I'm not sure if we need it, but let's do it anyway. And the final thing before we start implementing these stubs is let's have the ability for this to sort of dispatch events, essentially. So another quick function, public static. And the callback that we'll use is event. And what we use to do this, UI event is possibly not the right name, but we'll use a Haxe UI class. So we'll private. Like I said, I knew this bit was going to be a little bit boring, unfortunately. If I'd thought ahead, I would have written this first. HaxeUI.utils event map. And I believe we need UI event 2. Okay, so register event, pretty straightforward. We'll just add it to the event map. Add, and we'll say name. I'm going to keep the login nice and simple. I think I got to use a function. Yeah, just going to add. And we'll add a user. And let's also dispatch the let's say what logged in. Okay, so again, nothing particularly special there. Didn't work, I don't know why, but we'll sort that out in a minute. So what we're going to do now is when we click on that login button, we want something to happen, right? So that is the main view. So the main view is actually a custom component. So that's the main view built out of, like we showed in the other one, it's built out of main. So you don't have to load it in the same way. The way this one actually loads is a bit different. So if you go to your actual main class, here, just to follow through, it's as simple as that. There's a custom component, and we just main view and just add it and add app start. As I mentioned, this start isn't actually needed for the HTML5 backend, but it's just a habit to put it there now, or it should be. So yeah, so back to our main view. Now we've got that button there, so I think we called it login button. So we know that login button, one click. So we know that we should do something here. I think I'm going over. So that's linked up. Now we want to know what we want to do. Sorry, okay. So another custom component that we'll make is going to be used in our dialog. So we'll quickly add a custom component, and we'll call it what? Login dialog. Much the same as before. Login dialog extends component. And we want to build this from, I'm just going to quickly copy and paste it from here, it's going to be easier. And we'll call it what? Login, I guess. Okay. So this should be auto-discovered now. I think it's probably going to break something. Not sure what. First of all, there is no XML file, so that's not good. So we need to create that. So in the dialogues thing here, well, nope. In the other one, let's just, and let's just call it, let's just make it really nice and simple at the moment. So we've got a custom component, we've got our XML, it's all linked together hopefully, unless something breaks as soon as I try to use it. But of course we want to actually show this as a dialogue. We don't actually want this to be part of the UI. We want it, and there's a way to do that in HaxeUI as well. So what we'll do is where we want it to be shown basically, which is on the main view, which I've lost. Yep. So here we can just go screen. Dot instance dot dialog, show dialog, and yeah, we can just give it, we can just go and we'll need to import that. See if we made any mistakes. Okay, so that should be fine. Show dialog, and we want to just show this dialog. Okay, so what should happen, assuming this is done, this is working, is we're now actually starting to play with the UI, which is better. So we've got a dialog, you can't see it, but it's got a custom component in there, and it's just got an OK button. So now what we do is we go back to our builder. Eventually there's going to be some sort of export feature or some sort of something like that. It doesn't exist at the moment. So you'd have to manually Control-C that. Go back into our dialog code. Lost. And let's just get rid of all of that and paste in our real stuff. Yep. Okay, so now we've got a login dialog. Doesn't work, doesn't look right. I'm going to get rid of that icon actually because it's crappy. And then we'll change it to, well, let's just get rid of it for now. Unfortunately, also you need to rebuild every time you change the UI. It'd be nice to have some sort of auto-loading sort of thing, but that doesn't exist at all. So you have to rebuild this, refresh your web page, everything. Okay, so we've got a basic thing. It's not great, but we can fix that later with styles. That's really easy to do. I'll show you that as well, assuming I have time. But what we want to do is, okay, so first of all, in our main view, now we've got our show dialog. We should have it somewhere. Yeah. So I can't remember the parameters now. Options, I'll create that later. And a callback. Okay, so what do we want to do now? We want to use our user manager. Okay. And we should just be able to go, again, everything gets nicely typed for you, so you should just be able to go username, .text, and .password. And we could use a function callback, I guess. Function. Okay, so this is essentially should log us in for all intents and purposes, and dispatch. I don't have options, and dispatch a bunch of signals basically. To anything listening, which is nothing at the moment. Really? Seems weird. Okay. Again, I told you this is going to take way too long. So we want to dispatch a new event, new UI event logged in. Okay. So it doesn't do a huge amount, I don't think. But what should happen is you log in with let's say iHeart, and we've logged in, although nothing has changed, obviously, everything's exactly the same. Oh, is there an error? I missed it. Okay. Line 58.
Can you try the problems tab on the bottom terminal?
Nice, this is new for me. This is very helpful. Yeah. That's very, 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 very useful. I've only started using VS Code just recently, basically, and a Mac for even less. Okay, so that should work. But again, I don't think anything particularly different is going to happen, to be fair. So, yeah, I mean, exactly the same thing, because we haven't really done anything with that login. So now what we want to do, again, let's see, we just want to add a function, let's say here. And well, we'll do some stuff in there in a minute. First of all, let's register. So let's go. I believe it was logged in, right? And okay. So now we've got something, except it needs an event, but that's fine. Okay. So now essentially what we know is wrong. So again, same thing's happening, but now it should have dispatched an event to anything listening. And in that case, we essentially just want to show our add button again. So all we really want to do is, I know it happens to be called add group dot hidden equals false, and also let's say we want to go login button dot text equals user manager dot user dot full name. So assuming that the dispatching works, which I'm hoping it will. Okay, so we've got add event, and that's changed to in Harrigan, so that's fine. So that's working, and now this should, the behavior of this now is exactly the same. Everything works as it should. So what else was I going to show you? Yeah, let's say it fails. Well, first of all, let's something a bit more HaxeUI. Let's fix that login dialog because it looks a little bit bad. First of all, one thing that I noticed is that's not a password. Something that doesn't exist in the builder, unfortunately, is you can't set it to a password, so we're going to have to do that manually. it's just called so that should be a password now. We also let's also make this width is 100%. Let's make the text fields the right width. And I think one thing we also need to do is in the main dialog, we also want to go percent width. So this should at least fit a little bit better. I'm hoping, unless I screwed it up. Yeah, so it fits a little bit better, but we also need, obviously, to change those. Let's change this. Okay, so this should look like a bit more of a normal login dialog for all intents and purposes. Yeah, and this should also be a password now. Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure if it's actually worth showing you because I think I'm going to go far too long. But so we've got our general login system working, and I kind of feel like I might leave it there for this and go on to the other slides. So that, yeah, so we've ended up styling something, and everything should work now as it should do. You can add your participants and everything, and we only really locked it down for one single position. There's a single point of entry for this application, happened to be a single point of entry. And in reality, what I was thinking about showing you, but I feel like it's going to take too long, is also creating a logout system and you know, that kind of stuff. But I can just feel like I'm going to be ending up writing Haxe code without any purpose to do with Haxe UI. So I think, seeing as I've only got half an hour left, I might move on, to be honest. There's no more code for any more of this, so you'll be happy to know, I guess. So I'll just go back to the slides. I just want to mention like some, so these are some of the notable enhancements that have come recently. I mean, by recently I mean sort of, I don't know, maybe the last 5 months maybe. So the first one to mention, which is really important, is there's this new validation branch that mainly Pablo Martin, aka Awakening, has been working on, which uses, I think, like a Starling type validation system. And the results are fantastic. I mean, it's about 3 to 10 times faster across the board. It depends on the backend you're using, but if you're using like the HTML5 backend, it can be 10 plus times faster. For other ones, a little bit slower, but it's still a huge increase on the base master validation system. I got a new website coming, which I've been working on, and new API docs. I don't know how well you can see it there, but these new API docs there, they're going to help a lot, I think, because they're nice to use and they're actually full. They're actually useful. Nick has written a Haxe UI Flixel backend, which he's written all by himself essentially. So this, I think, answers a bit of the question of, can you write anything you want? Can you write your own backend? And the answer is yes. You can. It doesn't even have to be Flixel, of course. It could be a text-only backend. It could be literally anything you want. And Nick has just spearheaded that and done it all by himself, and it's working pretty well, it seems. There's the Haxe UI Builder, which I showed you. There's a lot to do on it, to be fair. There's a hell of a lot. It's not feature complete at all. And it's quite easy to break with the non-validation system. With the validation system, it's faster and a little bit more harder to break, but it's still got some problems for sure. And these REM units. This is another thing that Pablo had started, it's actually integrated, which is the instead of using percent sizes all over the place, you can just use these REM units, and it's kind of based off the default font size essentially on the device or the computer or whatever. He prefers to use it that way. I prefer to use DPI and auto scaling. You can use both. But they all work. But it's nice to have them now because I think it's a web thing, I believe, right? REM units. I think it's something like that. And I don't really write web pages, but you can use both. So they're the recent enhancements that currently exist. The validation branch isn't in master yet. It's something that I need to get into master, but in order to do that, I have to change every single backend. And at the moment, the validation system only works with OpenFL, HX widgets, and HTML5, I believe. So I need to do car and all the other ones. It's not a huge change, but it's certainly time. So there's that. Now, these are things that are coming up. These are things I'm going to get in there eventually. So IDE plugins. So this is something that, again, using the builder, I think it's be very possible to separate that out a little bit. So you can separate it out into just the design part. It doesn't have to necessarily be the source part that I showed you. That could be a callback or something like that. And that could hook into maybe VS Code, for example. And then you could start designing your UI, and it could actually just hook in, and actually you could share the XML between the two, hopefully. I haven't looked into it too much. I know that Valentin did something about it, not using the builder, but using a way of communicating between things, and that's a possibility. So I need to look into that, and it's certainly something that I've been playing with, separating the builder out into separate parts and getting them to communicate with, the outside world, if you like. There's the Haxe UI Android backend. Now, it's working, but I've had some problems with it that I think go away once I use the validation branch. So again, once I get the validation branch into master and it becomes standard, this gets much, much easier and things get a little bit better. Another one is internationalization. Another one that Pablo's been sort of interested in, and it's a PR that's outstanding. I haven't really looked at it in any huge depth. But the ability where internally, internationalization is very easy for Haxe UI. It looks good and it seems like it's a sensible approach, but I haven't massively looked at it, but it looks important. Okay, so finally, now this is a real application. I don't know if Mark's in, but it's so this is a real application that was written in ActionScript and Flex. And they obviously, with Flash dying and all this kind of stuff, they wanted to move away from anything Flash, but they also had a very, very, very heavy code base that used Flex all over the place. So it wasn't like some of the guys that have been talking about conversion here. They're using their own UIs. Everything is kind of sprites essentially, I guess. So it's, that's a possibility for them. But they had a lot of MXML and they had a lot of general sort of flexy stuff. Now Haxe UI isn't a replacement for Flex, but there's a very kind of there's a bit of a crossover, which I think I wrote there. That we have a very similar approach to layouts and components, like a VBox and an HBox, buttons, list views. They're not the same, but they are quite similar. So this is the application that these guys have written, and that has been converted over. It's already actually working. I'll show you it in a minute. It's about 60,000 lines of code, ActionScript and Flex code. They have an existing customer base, and this is really important because their customer base cannot see the difference. They don't want to see any difference between this application. It literally should work and feel exactly the same to them. It's not an upgrade as far as they're concerned. It's the same application, and they get about 3,000 users a day apparently. This is also very cool as well. This is where Haxe UI can potentially shine. It's an iterative approach. So the first version of it is basically converting their existing AS3 code to Haxe code using the AS3 to HX, and then messing around with their Flex code using Haxe UI and making it all work together. And that's using the Haxe UI OpenFL backend, because obviously sometimes they use the Flash API and all this kind of stuff. So that's the first approach. But once we sort of isolate the points where it's using the Flash API, it's very possible, potentially in the future, to then actually turn this into use the HTML5 backend, which means you're no longer using Flash at all. The OpenFL is gone. Now you're essentially generating a DOM tree. And it's certainly possible, but that's much later down the line. At first, they just want to see their application working without using Flash, because obviously that's going to be dead soon. So they've saved a hell of a lot of time. I mean, trying to so far it's taken them about 4 months. I mean, I haven't been working on it myself, really. It's mainly these guys have done that. They've sort of hit the ground running, which is quite impressive. And yeah, they've done it in, I would say, about 4 or 5 months so far. And they've essentially migrated basically the whole application over. There's still little things that aren't working exactly. But in the main, the whole thing's working. And it's been a great testbed for Haxe UI, because it's not something that I thought about, Flex to Haxe UI, but it's actually really interesting because it works. I mean, it really is a possibility. And I think a lot of, not just people who write games are thinking about, oh dear, what are we going to do with our Flash applications? I think, Flex applications are also going to be starting to be a bit worried about that, losing Flash on the browser. So a few things that came up about this certainly is that the docs are not helpful at all. Not these docs, the original docs, which basically didn't exist. You either ask me or hope that you can read the source code. So I think that will help with the general API. There's a lot of things, like I say, they're not exactly the same. Sometimes the terminology that I use in HaxeUI isn't the same that it is in Flex. And so someone coming from a Flex background automatically assumes, oh, this is the way it is because everything else is so similar, and it's not. It's a different thing, which the docs could clear that up in a second, but they don't exist at the moment. And it would be useful in the same vein to have a sort of a migration guide from HaxeUI, from Flex to HaxeUI, with the little gotchas like, hey, this isn't going to work, and this is a bit different, and this isn't exactly the same. It doesn't exist, but it's something that, that would make sense. So let's see if I can just show you that quickly. I'm sure something will go wrong here as well. Yeah, so this is the application. So this is all HaxeUI. This is a HaxeUI application at this stage. And yeah, let's see if I can make it full screen. Yeah, so it's all, I think data seems a little bit, I remember seeing more interesting data before. I'm not sure why. Again, I'm also probably the wrong person to show you through this application because I'm not 100% sure how it works internally. But all of this stuff, I mean, this is a list view with a custom item renderer, and this custom item renderer is taking data from a server and, you know, drawing a thing. But this is a HaxeUI list view. There's nothing, it's not a scroll view or anything like that. It's exactly as you'd expect. These are, I believe these are HaxeUI components and all this kind of stuff. I remember seeing this tree view being a little bit more interesting at one point, but maybe the data's changed, I'm not sure. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a huge amount to show there, but just what's quite cool is that is, you know, OpenFL to HTML5. And I can't remember the address of the original, unfortunately, but the original looks almost exactly the same as this. Like I say, there's a few little issues here and there. The map seems to have gone as well. I'm not sure why that's disappeared. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure about everything here. Yeah, I remember looking at it more like this. And there used to be a map here and some other stuff, but seems to have gone, not sure why. So yeah, so this is it's been a nice really test bed. It's not a massive application, but it's certainly not small either. And they have an existing code base that they needed to move forward. And that's been really interesting. They didn't do it like any of you guys did with basically what they did is they put their AS3 code through HX to, or the converter AS3 to HX, and then manually, it's small enough, 60K is enough to manually go through and sort of double check if it's screwed up, because it screws up a few things, and actually go through them and find solutions like dictionaries and that kind of stuff. So it's small enough that they were able to do that, which obviously doesn't make sense with a million lines of code. And then, of course, the Flex stuff is almost totally different. So that had to be, well, I suppose, reinvented if you like, but they take the similar approach and just change the bits that don't make sense for HaxeUI. And it worked. Yeah, and I think that's me, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about the length and just the hex coding. Yeah, any questions?
Are we speaking about HaxeUI version 2?
Version 2, oh, absolutely, yeah. Version 1 is essentially frozen, if you like, yeah.
Is there a big difference?
There's a huge difference, yeah. Version 1, apart from being pretty badly written, it was only an OpenFL library. That's it. It could only use OpenFL. And I think also it's linked even possibly to OpenFL 3.6.1 even. So you can't even use new OpenFL with it without code changes.
And so from what I saw on the website, HaxeUI version 2 doesn't support mobile platforms yet.
It does. It should.
You told about.
Except, well, yeah, that's coming up, not natively, but it should. OpenFL should work. HaxeUI OpenFL should work on mobile, and it should now auto-scale and DPI. That's a new thing, well, relatively new. But I mean, I've tried it a couple of times, and actually the UI is certainly usable for that. The only problem is it's not optimized for it. So, for example, a drop-down box on mobile will be kind of like a Windows drop-down box. You know, it'll be kind of click and then it will come down, whereas it needs to like jump out of the screen. So that has to be changed, and you know, there's ways to do that, of course. But so it's not optimized, but it's functional. I would prefer to put more effort myself personally into native Android, because I think that's where you're really, that's more useful for UI for sure. But we'll just have to see what comes first or what's more pressing. But it should work on a mobile, but it's certainly not optimized. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the responsive?
There's nothing responsive about it. Yeah, someone else asked me about this as well. Like, you would have to write that as a layer above your application. So you would have to say, you know, if the width is this, or detect somehow that if it's a device or a browser or something, and then change your UI accordingly. It's possible to maybe build a HaxeUI responsive layer into it, but it certainly doesn't exist. It certainly doesn't exist at the moment. And I'm not sure even how easy it would be to do. It sounds like it should be easy, but I don't really have a lot of experience with that kind of thing, so I don't know.
Do you have any plans to do an iOS?
I think iOS is a real pain. I mean, I don't know, Simon, have you got any plans to do an Objective-C target? That seems to be the problem. I mean, I don't know anything about iOS. Basically, like I say, if you can see me using a Mac, you can see quite easily that I'm not a Mac person. So I don't own an iPhone either. Surprise, surprise. And I've never built an application for iOS either. So I don't know how I could get Haxe to create Objective-C or Swift, or I mean, I believe these are the languages that it uses, and I don't know how. I don't even know if that's possible. I know that there's an unofficial Haxe target, which is Objective-C, I believe. But I haven't tested it out. I don't know how it works. I need to buy an iPhone first, and I don't want to do that. So but yeah, so I don't have any plans whatsoever, none whatsoever, because I simply don't know how it works.
You would work behind OpenFL, but it's not native.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It won't be native. Yeah, I mean, OpenFL will do it by a CPP, I believe, right? So it will cross-compile via CPP, and then it will turn that into Objective-C, and then OpenFL would use that. So you can use HaxeUI if you're using the OpenFL backend, or if you're using the HTML5 backend, you could make a web page, and that would work, you know? Yeah, I mean, I've written a WinForms backend as well. So, and it, again, no dependencies.
There's like 4 or 5 Cocoa bindings for C#.
Okay, well, that's an interesting concept. Yeah, okay, yeah, because it will definitely, I mean, I've used WinForms, which is a C# library, and that works. I mean, I managed to do it there. And so if you got, yeah, if you can use C# on an iOS device, then yeah, that's certainly an avenue. Again, I don't know much about all of the different options, and I know that for Haxe there isn't an Objective-C option. But if there is a possibility to go from C# to something native, something truly native, then yeah, that's certainly something that could be very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's on GitHub at the moment. It's not available from HaxeLib at the moment because I kind of feel like if I release it on HaxeLib, then everyone's going to think it's official, and it's not. I don't want people to be like, hey, yeah, but what version are you using from HaxeLib? It's like, you're not. You've got one option, which is Git, and that's it. So you can use HaxeLib, Git, you know, in the right commands and all that. But it's all there. I mean, the instructions. Sorry? The documentation isn't online yet, but it will be very shortly. I was hoping actually to get it done before I came here, but I didn't in the end. But yeah, the new website itself will be online, and the new website includes the builder, includes the component explorer, it includes the new API and all that sort of stuff. It's all there. But yeah, I mean, this is all on GitHub. And yeah, there's instructions of how to use it, basic instructions of how to use it anyway. But this is the sort of stuff that you're going to have to do if you want to use it, which is HaxeLib Git. You know, none of it's in HaxeLib yet. I mean, I want to get it there eventually, but it'll be like 0.0.1. But then I know people are going to start complaining, so I'd rather avoid it for a while at least. Anything else?
If you are writing the HTML files, for example, if you compare it to React, for example.
Yeah, I don't think it works like React. There is binding, but I've fallen out in love with the binding that I came up with. It doesn't work properly. It's nice if you're if you want to bind a component to a component, but you don't want to have too much interaction between that, then it works fine. But if you wanted to bind to variables, for example, and then you change a variable and it automatically changes you know, the value there, it doesn't work like that at all. So I think I need to revisit. Well, I am revisiting actually. I've got a test application that works. A completely new method of binding. I think using I can't remember the library, but HaxeX bind or something. And it works a lot nicer, and it works more like what you'd expect, where you have a variable in a class, you know, x equals 2, and then the slider magically changes, or you can change the slider and x changes to 5 or something. It works much more like that, which is more ideal, certainly. There is binding in version 2, but it's just ignore it, would be my advice. It works, but it's ugly. Yeah, it's not clever. Yeah? Cool. Oh.
Maybe a stupid question, but just to be sure. Can I also skin complex objects, complex components with images?
Absolutely.
I mean, accessing scroll bars, all stuff.
Everything in HaxeUI is 100% themable. So everything comes from CSS. And then the CSS that you choose to use on that is completely up to you. So the scroll bar is a component with a button, another button, and then a button for the thumb. So if you want to, you can even remove the buttons by hiding them, and then you can just have a bitmap or whichever way you want, and then it will turn magically into a bitmap scroll bar. And the same for literally everything. Everything is 100% applicable, unless you're using a native backend, of course. Then they just disappear. But you don't. It would seem strange to me to be wanting Haxe UI. I mean, the point of using Haxe UI native would be because you want a native UI, I would guess. So yeah, it's definitely 100% possible to bitmap theme complex anything.
To what extent can you control the styling of the native UI then?
Well, you can control it. It really depends from operating system to operating system, but also framework to framework, I believe, because it's a Qt, which isn't native really. It's actually custom drawn. But then it doesn't, which is crazy. Yeah, I thought it was native, but it's not. It uses the libraries that maybe native controllers do, but it's actually completely their take on components. It's just a very, very good one. So that's why you don't really notice. But yeah, it's all custom drawn. But that means that you get to sort of break some of Apple rules. You can make a font size really big, and it doesn't matter because they'll take care of that. Whereas Apple themselves, if you're using the original native widgets, it won't allow you. Which is what WX widgets does. It's much more closer to the operating system. That's exactly what the OS is locking you down from doing. You can work around it, and I think I will work around it. But but when it comes to actually native theming, then, for example, on Windows, it's kind of fine. It's not fine. It's you can change the foreground color, essentially, of buttons, which is something you certainly can't do on Mac. You can change the size of font sizes, which you certainly can't do on Mac. So really the only lockdown is the Mac, which is basically you can't change anything. You're not allowed to, they won't let you. Or you write a different backend. You could use the Qt backend, which certainly doesn't exist at the moment. But you could do that, and then I think you get a hell of a lot of control. Then I think everything, you can just do whatever you want, I think. But yeah, it's really what the operating system allows, and generally operating systems don't allow you to do very much, to be fair. Yeah.
How far along is the OpenFL backend? Like, that's for everything that the native supports, or?
Yeah, I mean, OpenFL, I think it's the other way around, actually. I think it's the native support that has to catch up with the OpenFL backend. I think the two most advanced backends, they kind of split into categories, to be honest, is native and composites. So the composites is where everything is drawn by Haxe UI. So that can be OpenFL, CAR, HTML5, all of the sort of ones where it's like drawn by Haxe UI, if you like. They're quite far gone. They're very far along. The ones that are sort of lagging a little bit behind certainly are the native ones, because you have to find a way of bridging some information between them. So the component in Haxe UI, let's say a drop-down component, then has to talk to a native component that is sort of wrapped, if you like, around itself, because it's not drawing itself anymore. It's kind of delegating everything, all of its calls and everything get delegated to the actual physical component now. So that you have to create glue between all of them. Now, HX widgets is quite far gone. Android, Haxe UI Android isn't. There's a lot to do there. And native versions in HTML5 works pretty well as well. But it's the other way around, to be fair. It's the natives that's lagging behind the composites. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.